So the biggest storylines in this game for each team, for New Mexico State, it's how do you respond against, your first, I guess, maybe equal opponent after an offseason where you lose your head coach, 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗀𝘀𝗀, who joined Vandy as a consultant, right? But they're now allowed to coach. So with new NCAA rules, so I guess it kind of makes sense. But you lose your head coach, you lose star quarterback 𝗕𝘂𝘂𝘶𝗶𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗀𝘂𝑃avia to Vanderbilt as well, and star running back 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝘀𝘀𝑃₀ to Arizona, right? You lose all those stars, you lose a coach. How do you respond? They had 10 wins, including a win in Auburn against the Tigers. I think they won by double digits. And so they have a lot to replace. How do they respond, right? They've had a couple games under their belt. How do they look now in their third game, roughly a quarter of the way through the season? For Fresno State, it's how do they look against a team of, closer quality, right? We saw them against Michigan. We've seen them now against Sacramento State, right? Fresno State's right in the middle of those two teams. Sacramento State inferior to Fresno State, and Michigan, even though we just talked about them a lot and how they're really not that good this year, they are still, they have more talent than Fresno State. So it's really a gauge of how good is this Fresno State team really against a similar opponent. New Mexico State, their focus this year has been the ground game. Their quarterback has been an issue. Parker Awad is 14 of 40 this season. That's 35% completion percentage, which is dreadful. He's thrown for 195 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. But the running game is their bread and butter, right? They can't throw the ball to save their lives. But Seth McGowan has over 150 yards on 26 carries with 2 touchdowns, averaging 5.9 yards per carry. And Mike Washington also has over 100 yards on the ground. No wide receiver, or tight end for that matter, has more than 4 receptions this season. So not only do they barely throw it, they don't have a dude who's out there who they can rely on. They spread the ball around. So the formula for New Mexico State is going to be ground and pound all the way. On defense, safety Tatum Barnes leads the team with 13 tackles, also has a pass breakup and an interception. Linebacker Sone Alpiu follows Barnes with 13 tackles, 3 pass breakups, 4 pressures, and 1 batted pass. Both players lead the team in snaps. They've both been out there on the field a lot with over 119 snaps for each. The problem is they have big problems in the passing game on defense, right? So not only can they not throw the ball, they can't defend it when their opposition throws the ball. And when they played Liberty this past week, they were exposed in the running game as well. Quentin Cooley was very efficient on the ground, over 100 yards on only 11 carries. So this defense has a ton of problems, and the offense is going to be very predictable, which makes things easier for Fresno State, right? Quarterback Mikey Keene is pretty underrated, and while he has thrown 4 interceptions to 3 touchdowns, I like him to bounce back in a really big way against this porous secondary. And same thing for running back Malik Sherrod. He's only averaging 2.2 yards per carry with a longest rush of 9 yards this season. This defense, though, for New Mexico State is the perfect defense to rebound against and get those numbers up a little bit. They have 2 wide receivers in Magdalena and Jalen Moss, who are forces, both with over 170 yards in the air each. And they have some dogs on defense, primarily linebacker Tuasivi Nomura, who has 17 tackles and a fumble recovery. And he's pretty locked down in coverage. He's only allowed 3 completions on 8 targets for 18 yards. And he's just a beast in the running game for New Mexico State, as you can see, with 17 tackles through 2 games already. For Fresno State, he's going to eat against this New Mexico State team that runs the ball a lot. So now that they're no longer outmatched by Michigan, right, who was they held their own against their running game, held Michigan to 4.4 yards per carry, 34 attempts for 148 yards, and specifically Donovan Edwards to 11 carries for 27 yards, which is 2.5 per carry against a far inferior team compared to Michigan. Fresno State should have their way because they've shown that they can go out there and stop a team who their bread and butter is the running game. So I really don't see this as much of a contest. I think that Fresno State matches up perfectly for the only thing that New Mexico State is good at, and Fresno State's offense should run rampant against a, quite frankly, really porous defense for New Mexico State. So I have Fresno State winning this one, and it'll just come down to, by how much is going to come down to how well they can stop the running game from New Mexico State.
Yeah.
So a lot like you said, there's no mystery that 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀 has struggled up to this point, but they've also played two really good teams in Michigan and Sacramento State, and we'll get to Sacramento State here in a second. But like you said, 4 interceptions, 3 touchdowns is never something that you want to have on a stat sheet. But a Fresno State team going against a Michigan team, yeah, it's kind of a tall task, especially keeping them to only 30 points. So 30-10, and he started to warm up at the second half of that game. Yeah. The Sacramento State thing, I've been screaming this all year. I've been telling people to put money on Sacramento State because I think that they had the capability of upsetting a lot of teams that they played so far. And they have one of the best defensive backfields in the FCS. So I expect them to definitely make some noise this year. But Fresno State squeaked that one out by 13 or 16 points, winning at 46-30. So obviously, 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀 has a step up. The weakest part is not having a running back over 100 yards in 2 games, to me, for Fresno State. If you're going to help 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 out, you got to be able to run the ball more effectively than they have. But one of the brighter spots is a guy that's number 10 in all-purpose yards at this point in time. That's Magdalena. He's one of football's best receivers at this point, over 302 yards, number 4 in the country, top 10 in average yards per catch, 23.2. He's no joke. So having a guy like him is obviously, obviously going to make your team better and make 𝗕𝘂𝘀𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀 feel a little bit more comfortable. As far as, Fresno State's defense, they're ranked 88th in total defense. So they're at the bottom half of the league in touchdowns allowed, with 7 right now. One of the bright spots that I did underline before, when we were talking about, my runner-up was Fresno State to win the MAC. And, I underlined this point because I thought this was important. 𝙁𝙤𝙘𝗀 Hamilton is an absolute dog at cornerback. Remember, he filled in for Cam Lockridge last year, who he suffered through a chest injury. So, they have him, and he's playing. And I told you guys, he's either going to be comfortably the number 2, or by the way that he played last year, he's going to enter himself as kind of the number 1 guy out there. And by all regards, he's the number 1 guy. He's picking up where he left off last year. He's tied 19th in the country in pass breakups with 3 right now. And that's no joke. Of course, playing teams like Michigan and being number 19 in the country or being tied number 19th, that's you're in pretty good company this far in your career, especially being at Fresno State. But can Fresno State settle down offensively and recover from some of their deficiencies, like the running game, after playing, two big games by all accounts for them this year? It has not been any jokes. And then you look at the New Mexico State side. Obviously, their strength is their running game. Get in Seth McGowan from Oklahoma, get in Mike Washington from Buffalo, combined for 260 yards on the ground. It's always great, right? Especially for a smaller school like that, being able to establish the run makes it a lot easier on, you're not going to find the best quarterbacks down there in the Mountain West and things like that. So, and we're seeing that with the Boise States of the world with Ashton Jeanty. He's directly carrying that team. They did lose to one of our favorite teams that a lot of us are very high on. They lost to Liberty last week, 30-24. Parker Wed, he's getting his first starts at quarterback as well. But one thing that was very promising out of his performance last week, 64-yard touchdown pass against Liberty. But he's still inexperienced, and you can see that by his stat line, which Khalid went over. He's getting there, but having a running game is going to help that. One of the positives about New Mexico State, they're tied 13th in third down defense. So going against a team that's going to be able to progressively get the ball downfield, especially in the pass game, it's great that you have a pretty good defense. New Mexico State is ranked 129th out of 134 schools in passing yards allowed. So you have a great third down defense, but then also you're not that great against the pass, which those two things kind of need to match up. So yeah, you're great at stopping teams, but you give up a bunch of passing yards. 313.5 is what they give up per game so far in their two games. I got Fresno State here though. I don't think it's any question that they're going to come out and pretty much smack the dog crap out of these dudes. I expect Mikey Keene and Mike Delano to have a big day. I think they might set a record this game. If this is the perfect team to do it. But then also this is going to boost their confidence for the rest of the time. Can they win the conference? Absolutely. I still see them as a runner-up though. But we talked about this before. Playing the Michigan out the gate is either going to make or break their year. And it seems like they're going to probably be able to capitalize in this game. So give me Fresno State Bulldogs in this one.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll look at the case for Fresno State. So we've talked a lot about Mikey Keene. 2 interceptions, 2 touchdowns in this previous game against Sacramento State. Had a little over 350 yards. They need to sprinkle in the run game more, but we also do look at what he did against Michigan, where they were pretty much in the game. Yes, I know this final score was like 10-30, but they were in the game majority of the time. Yes, unfortunately, you had the Will Johnson pick 6. That's where the third interception came from. But you also, as a total, only had 9 rushing yards in that game. So the run game just was non-existent against Michigan. If Fresno State was able to get off the run game, I truly do believe that game would change a little bit.
Yep.
Last game against Sacramento, Malik Sherrod, he had 22 carries for 54 yards, but also 2 touchdowns. So that's kind of what you want to see a little bit from New Mexico. Yes, Mikey Keene is very underrated. He's very high risk, high reward. He can throw for 350 yards and get 2 touchdowns, but he also is going to get interceptions, as we've seen. 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions so far in 2 games. You have to kind of sprinkle in that run game a little bit. We've mentioned all the stats of the defenses.
I thought you were about to say Gardner Minshew. I said, huh?
He's back. Mentioning for New Mexico State, they fought pretty well against Liberty. It wasn't until Liberty had an offensive explosion where they scored 21 points in the fourth quarter to where they were able to win that game. But we also, we've talked about Parker Awad a lot. He's had 14 completions, 39 attempts. Like Khalil said, 35 completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. The 2 touchdowns came against Liberty. His QBR is 12.6. 132nd in the nation. You would have a better QBR if you just spiked the ball every play. That's just straight up. If he were to spike the ball every play, you would have a better QBR than this dude.
Right.
So this is kind of just a matchup of inexperienced quarterback versus a very high risk, high reward. Now again, for New Mexico, you look at the 9 passes, 158 yards. That's great. Dante talked about for New Mexico, Seth McGowan and Mike Washington. Seth had 15 carries, Mike had 14 carries, but they both went over 60 yards. So if you can get the run game going as well, basically for both of these teams, is you need the run game to help out these quarterbacks. I'm going to go with Fresno State though, just because Mikey Keene is more experienced and he can drop 350 plus yards on you. Yes, he might throw an interception or 2 there, but at least he's able to get the touchdowns along with that. Yes, he's asked to throw the ball like 40 times, but he's not completing like 9 passes out of those 40 times. He's completing at least half.
Right. Yeah, I think across the board this week, there's a lot of
also want to let it be known I almost made the same mistake when I was doing this research. I typed in New Mexico Lobos and then went, wait a minute, they're not
That's the
playing this
Aggies.
week. That's next to it. And then I was like, son of a bitch, I've done it again.
The New Mexico State Aggies.
I can't escape the Lobos, bro.
I know. And you switched them the first time, and now you switch it the opposite way. It's crazy. It's nasty work.
Well, no, I caught myself before the show.
So that's our very first game right there. Bet all across the board. We're pretty confident Fresno State. I would probably say this is the lock of the day, the lock of all our picks right here. Yeah. I don't see New Mexico making enough noise to make a difference.